Hello and welcome. This is the Excel and Elevate Leadership Podcast. Here at VIA, we're committed to the principle of what it means to be a steward leader and to apply the SERVE principles of leadership. We love to see you excel in your leadership responsibilities and have opportunities to elevate that leadership. With guests from around the globe, this is a place where we have leadership conversations about what matters most.
Welcome to the Excel and Elevate podcast, where we have leadership conversations about the things that matter most. Today, we are talking about the VIA leadership principle of Reinvent Continuously. This comes from Ken Blanchard's book, The Secret, where he says that good leaders possess a never-ending focus on improvement. This is around their leadership, both their character and their leadership skills, their strategy, and their structure. So in the past, we've spent a lot of time talking about our personal and professional development as leaders. So today we are going to hone in on that invention process around strategy and structure by looking at a tool from Patrick Lencioni that VIA has kind of adopted and used for the last year to help us think about how we approach invention in a healthy way. So Donnie, why don't you take a second and tell us a little bit more about this tool, what it is, and why we have chosen to embrace it here at VIA.
Yeah, so Working Genius is a tool that was brought about by Patrick Lencioni. You might be familiar with other books of his, like Five Dysfunctions of a Team, The Advantage, great leadership books that we actually refer to here as well in our organization. But what Working Genius does is kind of hones in on some natural areas of talent that individuals possess and how they use those and enjoy those when it comes to approaching work and productivity, which really has a huge effect on team dynamics, and then especially on that systems and processes piece. So these talents are actually broken down into 6 categories. And so those are wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity. So 6 categories that it's broken down into about different ways that individuals naturally approach work and productivity. And there's 3 different tiers within that. So there's your working genius. So there's 2 things which really kind of elevate above the others. Then there's your working competency, which is kind of this middle ground, and then your working frustration. So as it breaks it down into those, it's saying, hey, what are you kind of more naturally geared toward? So that's your genius. And your competency says, hey, I can do these things, but then your frustration. So there is this energy management piece, which we'll talk about later. And then it's really how do we use these 6 different categories and 6 different steps in a process to go from the conception of an idea to the completion of an idea. So, Carissa, I know that you have more that you're going to help us drill down specifically on each of these, and then how moving from each of these steps helps us to move forward in that process. But why did we choose that with VIA? Why is Working Genius something that we said, hey, we probably need to lean into this a little bit more, because there's people and there's kind of productivity. So there's productivity, and we can say, hey, how can we be more efficient? How can we do this better? How can we do this bigger, better, faster, stronger? That's an approach. But how does the individual fit within this kind of process of, we'll talk about landing the plane, or we'll talk about how the gears are connected together. And so why does this matter in VIA? So as a team, like as I'm working on a project as a team, from conception to completion, where do I fit in? If I'm wonder and invention, how does what I do fit in to my team? How can I use my strengths and talents to complement the other members of my team? How can we use their working geniuses and competencies to kind of help facilitate that whole process from conception to completion, and see that everybody really kind of feel like, hey, man, I feel like I fit in here. I feel like I'm contributing in a healthy way. I see like how I'm using my gifts and talents to kind of help bring this project to its to this best case scenario at the end to completion. And so as we think about these team dynamic pieces, sometimes we might find some frustrations or some genius moments when we feel like, hey, I'm really leaning into what I feel like I'm good at, or I'm totally frustrated because maybe they're asked to work from their frustration. So yeah, I know that you're going to lean into some of these things, Carissa, so I don't want to take it too much of that time, but why, and you can lean into why as well. But I think one of the reasons is this is so important and for team dynamics. Not just for the productivity side, but we value results and relationships. And so I think Working Genius is kind of blending those results and relationships together. But especially as we talk about this invention process or reinvent continuously, Working Genius is a great tool to help us navigate a lot of those conversations. So talk to us a little bit more about how we use Working Genius, what that looks like for the individual as well as teams. So just walk us through those things.
Yeah, I think that you just hit the nail on the head. It's the valuing results and relationships. And so we're going to talk about the people part of it, but even how we work through a project and doing that in a effective and healthy process is a way we value relationships and value the people that we work with, because it leads to healthy engagement and healthy work environments. And so what Patrick and his team found as they kind of sat with this concept and came up with this idea was that, we tend to think about invention as like, oh, we have an idea. And so we have the invention and then we like jump straight to execution and launch. And as they researched, they found that there's kind of these like other steps that kind of fit in there. And if we skip them, we actually can invent or reinvent in ways that can be destructive, to our team, to our organizations, to our structures. And so that's why going through this process in a linear way is so vital. And so the first one, when we're just talking about how do we move through this with any type of project or invention, is wonder, where we think about we answer one of two questions. What is the potential that we're missing out on, or what is the problem that we need to solve? And if we've got to start there because it informs the invention. Like, we don't want to just invent for the sake of invention. We need to know, what is that need is that invention going to meet, or what issue is it going to resolve? And so once we've identified that and really honed in on that, then we move to the invention process, which is when we dream and we create and we get on the whiteboard and we throw out all the ideas. Well, once we kind of land on something, we don't want to just then jump to moving it into execution. The next stage we want to move to is discernment, where we want to sit in a space of saying, okay, we have an invention, but is it the best invention? Is this the right thing? Is this really going to solve, going back to our question and wonder, what that potential or problem is? And so we kind of sit in this, what I call the discernment invention loop, where we discern and then we go back to the invention and we tweak, and then we go back to discernment. Oh, no, I still don't think it's right. And we kind of stay there as long as we need to stay there until we're sure that we have the right product to move forward, or fix to whatever we're changing. And then we go through discernment to the next stage, which is galvanizing. And so before we can just go into changing and moving, we have to actually rally people to the invention, whether that's a change in a structure, whether it's a new product, whether it's an event, whatever that looks like. We need to get everyone on board. We need to champion it. We need to help people understand why we're doing it, what it is. And we got to cultivate buy-in among our staff and whoever is involved in that piece. And then we move to that enablement, that fifth stage of enablement, which is where we give those doers, the worker bees, here's what we need to do, how we need to do it, and we release them into action so they can begin to put all those pieces together. But then any invention it's not any good if we don't finish it. We have to get it actually across the finish line and out to be used and out into the world. So that last stage of tenacity is so important. And in that stage, we've got to identify what the finish line is. What does it look like to actually finish this project or this new structure or this new system, and get that across the finish line? And so as we move anything through that process, what Working Genius does is it it kind of gives us some like gates in a sense of like knowing, okay, here, where are we in the process? Did we skip a step? And helps us think through where we're moving. And when we get towards the end, there's some micro wonder and invention discernment going on as we start to actually put things into practice and work it out and think about, okay, wait, that's not quite working out how we thought it was in our head. And so there's a little bit of that happening, but we shouldn't be going all the way back to that high 30,000 foot elevation, and so we should be moving kind of in a linear process down through these 6 stages. And that's kind of how Working Genius guides us in the Invent Continuously process.
Yeah, and that's super helpful. And one way to memorize that is the word widget. So you've got wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity. So you just think about that word kind of walking from the beginning to end. I liked how you highlighted that kind of WID cycle. So you're kind of working that idea out. Discerning it, getting it to a point to where it's then able to be released to, all right, now who are the people that we're going to galvanize and get together, create buy-in, and then launch that out to the people who we said, all right. And one thing I've learned about enablement is, like sometimes we hear that word, that enabler is not a good thing from the psychological world, but enablement from this standpoint is actually really healthy because we're helping to set things up in systems and process to help them do it in a healthy way according to how they approach things. So like, hey, maybe here's a way that I approach this, but maybe that's not the best way for them to kind of set up and succeed as far as helping this to see it to completion. I love that. And then that tenacity piece at the end there. So one thing that we talk about as well is, how does it connect to the people in this process? So in the invention process, one of the things is, like I talked about that energy piece earlier. So there's the working genius, like, hey, this brings me life. This gives me energy. I'm all about it. This makes me go. The competency, which is like, okay, it's not quite as much energy giving as your genius, but hey, I'm competent here. And it's not kind of more of a neutral ground. It could kind of give me a little bit of energy, or it could kind of take away a little bit of energy, depending on where kind of on that line it stands. But then your frustration is definitely something. This is taking a lot of energy. It could be creating some tension and frustration because it's just not naturally how you're geared. And so one of the illustrations that Lencioni and their team uses is they do kind of put the gears together as far as, W all the way to T. And so you talked about, that 6-step process of, when if you go straight from wonder to tenacity and you don't do the middle thing, there's no gears really turning things. So wonder is not really turning in tenacity. And from the mechanical world, there's something called gear ratios. And so, if I have a really, really big gear and I have a really, really small gear, this turned once, but this gear would turn 5 times, right? So if we take, if we think wonder is the biggest gear and tenacity is that smallest gear, it's kind of like the details piece. And so it's so if I connect tenacity directly to wonder, this moves once, but this moving 5 times. So if this is moving fast, this is moving 5 times faster. So when we skip that middle part of the process, it can feel like things are out of control for those tenacity people. So the wonder and invention people are just throwing some ideas out there. Tenacity people are already trying to figure out how to make it happen. They're trying to they're trying to think about all the details, and they're just spinning out of control because and the wonder people and invention people are like, no problem, everything's a-okay. But those tenacity people, so why do we have to have that middle part of the process? We call that gearing down. So wonder, then you have invention, was a little smaller gear, then D, which is a little smaller gear, all the way down to the smallest gear. So when this turns one time, gearing down actually creates that tenacity wheel to go at the gear to go at the same speed. So why is it important that we think about all steps of the process? Because when we don't, we're not gearing down effectively. It's like trying to land a plane. If I go from 30,000 feet to 10,000 feet in 2 seconds, you're going to feel that. Like the people on the plane are going to be like, what in the heck? What are you doing to me, pilot? This is crazy. I don't ever want to do that again. That would be extremely scary. So when we do the same thing with how we approach invention process from from the conception to completion, we have to be smooth in how we land the plane from 30,000 feet all the way to ground level. And we have to think about how we gear those things down. So there's that aspect. So when we think about our energy and how our energy relates to that kind of that gearing down process or landing the plane, if we're not cognizant of, as we walk through the process, we're not cognizant of the people in the process. If we're asking somebody who's high in wonder and invention to do something that's just full tenacity and that's their working frustration, it doesn't mean that they can't do it. It's just going to require a lot of energy. So there's an energy management piece. We all, like Lencioni says, we all need to do all six of these things. So we're not exempt from, like, just because I'm high in wonder and invention doesn't mean that I don't need to think about enablement and tenacity. I need to be a part of those things. But if I'm leading in those things, it's just going to take a lot of energy from me. So if there's somebody on my team that I can hand that to and them lead out in that process, it's just going to take a lot less energy for them. Then maybe that is, if that's their genius, it's going to bring them life. And so when you have this energy pool of your team, you're trying to consider how that pool of energy management is being considered, while also being familiar with all parts of the process. So as we think about gearing down, as we think about managing our energy, that really affects the people in the process. So just because you have a clear process, but if you have people in different, with working geniuses and frustrations in the wrong spots, some people may get burnt out really fast. Some people may feel like, I'm alive and this is great. And the next person having to work out of their frustration says, I hate this. This is the worst thing ever. It can be a really clear process, but it can be unhealthy for the people involved. So,
Yeah, just to clarify, it's not about role, right? Like, just because you're the team leader doesn't necessarily mean you're the wanderer. And just because you're the admin person doesn't necessarily mean you're the tenacity person, right? That's not what we're talking about. Like, this is just where you shine and where you derive joy in the project process. And so it's about knowing your team. We talked about that in the last episode about staff engagement and development, being a student of your team and knowing who brings what to the table and then unleashing them in where they bring strength to the team and making sure the right people are in the room. And so, yeah, what I love about Working Genius is it's so multifaceted and the impact on a team. Like you said, if you just go straight from wonder to completion, your staff are going to feel like you went from 30,000 feet to 100 feet off the ground, and everyone's going to, have smashed their head on the seat in front of them and feel like they're going to be sick because, like, that elevation drop, But also, if we skip a step in the process, we put our ministry at great risk, because if we just go straight to invention and we skip wonder, we might just be inventing something that's not actually meeting the need or solving the problem. Or if we skip discernment, we might have the wrong invention. If we go straight to enablement, we skip galvanizing, we don't create buy-in, we can crash engagement with our staff because they don't understand why we're doing it or what it's solving, or like no one's on board and we're just, commanding them to do things without them really understanding the project. So there's so much value in every step. There's value in understanding who is in the role and what's at the table. And then there's also cost in what gets skipped or what gets, left out. And so, we've been using this as a team for a while now, and really just learning just for a long time. Like, we didn't have a galvanizer. Like, no one on our team had a working genius of galvanizing. Like, most of us, it was our working frustration. Like, we might have been good at it, because that's a good thing to note. Like, you could be actually really good at something on this, but not derive energy and joy from it. And so that we had to think about that as a team. Like, we didn't have somebody who could actually so projects were getting kind of stuck and losing momentum, because we would do ideation and discernment and we would move through this whole process, and then they would kind of flatline a little bit because there was no one to really rally everyone. And so we actually, in our recruiting, we we started like making everyone take Working Genius who we were recruiting, and we were specifically looking for someone who had a working genius of galvanizing, because we knew that was a hole on our team that we really needed to fill, you know. And we've also had to start really thinking about meetings, like defining our meetings. I'm a wonder. I got wonder. My team is starting to keep a tally of how many times I use the word wonder in text and voice notes. So I was just wondering the other day. And I have to, as a leader, I have to have self-awareness. I have to know when I need to turn my wonder off in a meeting, or I need to just stay out of the meeting because we're in a get meeting. Like this is a time to finish what we started and get it across the finish line. And I need to turn my wonder off. I got to stay out of the clouds, and just knowing who needs to be in the room. And then the other thing that's been really important is knowing, so wanderers, discerners, and enablers, those three people who have geniuses, they're responders, not disruptors. So inventors, galvanizers, and tenacity, they're disruptors. They'll speak up, they'll throw in their voice, they will fight to be heard. But the other three, the wanderers will be thinking. They'll have amazing ideas. They'll see problems, they'll see potentials, but they may not say anything unless you ask. Same with the discerners. Like they're sitting there, they see the train wreck, or maybe they don't know what's wrong. Like they just know in their gut that something isn't right, and they may not even be able to tell you, and that might bother you, but trust their gut. Like just trust. If they're like, something's not right, just listen to that and trust that. But you're going to have to ask, because they're not going to just throw that out there and disrupt that space. And so knowing those nuances in your people and in the process is so critical as a leader, because those voices matter. As you're reinventing continuously, it's part of also seeing the future, right? Like, you need all those voices at the table. God gave you the team you have for the season that you're in, and those people matter. They have something to bring that you need as a leader for what you're doing in this season. And so you don't want to miss what they have to bring to the table.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of biblical precedent from the body imagery that we see all throughout the New Testament, and how we are a part of a body. So there's a spiritual gifting side of things, but we kind of think about this in a similar way, to where obviously we as an organization are saying, hey, God, we submit to you, we surrender to you, how you're leading us, Jesus, you are the head of who we are, but we have to figure out how to work together as individual parts of a body and an organization. And this is a really great tool to help us figure out that when it comes to that kind of working together, and how we find enjoyment from that, how we get energy from that. And it does consider the people within that productivity process. So I just think it's a really, really healthy thing for us to consider. And it's one of those, it's a challenging thing for a team, right? Because there may be some tougher conversations that come about. Like, hey, I feel like we just go straight from wonder to to galvanizing, or we skip some important parts of the process, or what, we don't even really know how we approach these things. We just say, hey, I have an idea, let's go do it. And so what this is a healthy slowing down of approaching things, and really letting that community of people speak into the process, and the community of people who are all being unified and led through the Holy Spirit, for us as an organization to mobilize the global church to send missionaries to unreached peoples, specifically through our different teams and how we approach those things. But allows that community of people around, that the team, like you said, that God has put together for this season at this time, to be able to move forward this mission and vision that we've been called to be a part of, and the teams that we get to be a part of.
Well, we want everyone to know, if you're interested in using this with your team, obviously, if you haven't already, we highly encourage you to just take the assessment. You can go to the Working Genius, has its own website. I think it's like $25 to take the assessment. You can get a team report. You can kind of all take it together, and it will put all that together and give you some insight on your team. They also have a great podcast. They're really short episodes. It's just a great way to kind of wrap your mind some more around it as a leader, maybe even look at some specific components of that if there's something specific you want to apply. There's several VIA teams that are using this, have implemented it. They're great. There's other leaders to learn from. Obviously, your LDG team is here as well. We're here to help you in implementation. If you've got questions, if you want to soundboard something, we would love to help process that with you. We're going to drop all those links in the show notes so you can access those. And we just look forward to seeing how God continues to use this tool to help us thrive as an organization and continue to be effective in the mission and the vision that God has given us, and to continue to live out our values of staff first, and just living out our VIA leadership principles. And so we'll see you next time when we have more conversations about leadership things that matter most.